So imagine seeing a headline that just makes you stop scrolling, right? Harvard University. I mean, a name everyone knows for it, like top-tier academics, suddenly has its permission to enroll international students pulled. It's a real jolt.
Absolutely, it's huge. When an institution like that faces something so drastic, it tells you there's something pretty significant going on under the surface, way more than just the headline shock.
That's exactly where we're going today. We're diving deep into the Harvard SLVP Revocation Report. It's dated May 22nd, 2025.
Right.
And our goal here, for you listening, is to kind of cut through all the noise. We want to understand the real reasons this happened, what the immediate fallout was, and what it all means for education more broadly. We're aiming for clarity here, trying not to make it overly complicated.
Makes sense.
Okay, so let's set the scene. What exactly went down on May 22nd?
Well, on that day, the Department of Homeland Security, DHS, which was operating under the Trump administration at the time, they officially revoked Harvard's SEVP certification.
SEVP, Student and Exchange Visitor Program.
Exactly. And basically, you can think of that certification as the essential permission slip universities need to host international students, the ones on F&M visas.
Ah.
So without that SEVP certification, the door for bringing in new international students effectively slams shut.
Right, so no SEVP means no new international students.
Yeah.
And for a place like Harvard, we're not talking about just a few people, are we?
Oh, not at all. The report points out there are over 6,000 international students currently enrolled there.
6,000?
Yeah. I mean, put that in perspective. That's bigger than a lot of small American towns. It really shows you the kind of global pull Harvard has and, well, the potential scale of the disruption. It's something like 27% of their whole student body.
27%, that's huge.
It really emphasizes Harvard's role, historically, as this major hub for academic talent from all over the world.
That scale really hits home. So, okay, this revocation happens. What was the immediate legal fallout for Harvard for the students already there?
The immediate legal impact was pretty significant. First off, Harvard was banned from enrolling any new international students for the upcoming semesters.
Okay.
But maybe even more worrying, the legal status of the international students already studying there?
Well, that was suddenly thrown into question.
Yeah.
Imagine being thousands of miles from home and your whole academic future is suddenly up in the air because of, an administrative decision.
That's an incredibly stressful place to be. So let's get to the big question for you listening. Why? Why did DHS take such a huge step? What reasons did they actually give?
Well, DHS laid out a few key reasons, but it's really important to remember these are framed as allegations in the report.
Right, allegations.
First, they brought up national security concerns. The idea was that there were people on campus linked to ideologies the government considered hostile.
Okay.
Second, they alleged ties to the Chinese Communist Party, or CCP. Specifically, they pointed to Harvard hosting visiting scholars who supposedly had military connections in China.
And lastly, there was non-compliance. DHS claimed Harvard hadn't provided records they'd requested about certain students.
So pretty serious accusations, especially the national security angle. The report even quotes the DHS secretary at the time, Kristi Noem, right? What did she say?
Yeah, Secretary Noem's quote was about protecting national integrity from academic infiltration. That phrasing immediately frames it as, a national security issue, suggesting a threat coming from the university environment itself.
Okay, so that's the DHS side of the story. But Harvard, they weren't just going to roll over, were they? What did they do?
No, definitely not. Harvard's response was immediate and very forceful. They filed a lawsuit against DHS right away.
Okay.
And their language was strong. They called the revocation an unlawful, politically motivated retaliation. They also said it was a breach of constitutional protections for due process and academic freedom. These are serious legal arguments, really challenging DHS's move.
Strong words, definitely. And the report mentions something crucial happened legally pretty quickly, something that offered a bit of breathing room.
Yes, that was really key. A federal judge granted a temporary nationwide injunction.
An injunction?
It essentially hit pause on the revocation order. And, crucially, it preserved the legal status of all international students at U.S. universities, not just Harvard's, at least until the whole case could be properly heard in court.
So like a temporary shield. It bought some time, but the fight wasn't over.
Exactly. The underlying issues, the accusations, they were still very much unresolved.
And Harvard's president at the time, Claudine Gay, she made a statement too.
She did. President Gay really doubled down, saying Harvard would exhaust all legal remedies to defend our students, our values, and the very idea of global academic exchange. It showed they weren't just fighting for themselves, but for this broader principle.
Right. Okay, let's shift focus a bit to the human side of this. For you listening, maybe you know someone who's studied internationally, you know the stresses involved. What kind of ripple effects did this have on the students themselves immediately?
Oh, for the students, the impact was, well, deeply unsettling. And it hit in different ways. Think about the students who'd already been accepted for fall of 2025.
Yeah.
Suddenly, they're facing the very real chance their visa applications would just be denied. All their plans, maybe years of work, just thrown into chaos. A dream potentially shattered overnight.
That's just devastating for those kids, their families. What about the students who were already there, like mid-degree?
Well, they were facing huge uncertainty about whether they could even finish their programs. They might have to suddenly think about transferring somewhere else, assuming another university would take them and had the right programs, or maybe even just stop their studies. And beyond just the logistics, which are a nightmare, the report really stresses the massive emotional toll, the anxiety, the uncertainty, especially being so far from home, from your support system.
The anxiety must have been off the charts. And this wasn't just contained to Harvard Yard, was it? What were the bigger waves this sent through other universities and maybe how the U.S. is seen globally?
Exactly. It wasn't just Harvard. There was this palpable sense of unease, a ripple effect spreading across U.S. higher education.
Other universities got nervous?
Understandably, yeah.
Yeah.
Especially ones with lots of international students. They started worrying, could we be next? And this definitely creates a big reputation risk for the U.S. internationally. People start asking, is America still the place to go for top education? Is it stable? This whole thing cast a serious shadow.
And we should probably touch on the money side, too. International students bring in a lot more than just tuition, right?
Oh, absolutely. The report mentions they contribute over $45 billion a year to the U.S. economy. That's through tuition, yes, but also living expenses, spending in local communities, all that.
$45 billion.
So if you see a big drop in international enrollment because of policies like this, it could cause real financial strain for universities and even for the towns and cities they're in. Budget problems, instability, it's a real economic factor.
Okay, so the economic impacts are huge.
Yeah.
What about the direct immigration policy side of things? Beyond just the F1 student visas?
Well, the immediate advice for students caught in this, the F1 holders, was basically look into transferring to keep your legal status. Find another school with SEVP certification.
But that's not always easy or even possible, right, if you're deep into specific research?
Exactly. It's a huge disruption. And looking bigger picture, the report predicts a likely chilling effect on future applications, especially from countries like India and China, which historically send the most students here.
So prospective students might just decide it's not worth the risk.
They might think twice, yeah. Worry about the stability of their education plans in the U.S.
And if they start looking elsewhere, where might they go? Which countries could benefit?
The report points to places like Canada, the UK, Australia, maybe Germany, countries with strong universities and potentially immigration policies that seem more predictable for students right now. We could see a real shift in where global talent decides to go.
There's a quote in the report from an immigration lawyer that really stuck out to me. It framed this in pretty stark terms.
Yeah, Raj Patel, he called it setting a dangerous precedent. Said it essentially weaponizes immigration policy against academic institutions. That's a really strong statement, highlighting the fear that this wasn't just about Harvard, but a new way of using policy.
It really is a stark warning. Okay, let's broaden out again. How did other people react? Other university leaders, other countries?
Well, domestically, other major universities reacted very strongly. The report mentions joint statements from places like Stanford, Yale, MIT, Columbia.
The heavy hitters.
Right. And they basically called the DHS action an assault on academic freedom. That kind of unified front from those institutions sends a really powerful signal about how serious they viewed this threat.
And international. It wasn't just a U.S. story, right?
No, definitely not. Countries like India and China, which, as we said, send huge numbers of students, they reportedly issued travel advisories, basically warning their citizens.
Wow.
And they were apparently rethinking their educational agreements with the U.S. Plus, the European Union chimed in, expressing grave concern about how this could undermine global research networks. It shows just how connected everything is.
It really does. And, amidst all the policy talk, the human side is just
Yeah.
So important. The report includes some quotes from students caught up in this. Can you share those? They really bring it home.
Yeah, they're powerful. There's Sarah M. She's an Iranian doctoral candidate. She was just 3 months away from finishing her PhD.
No.
And suddenly, her visa might be canceled. She's quoted asking, where do I go? How do I finish? Just agonizing uncertainty.
Unbelievable.
And then there's Ashwin R., an Indian student doing a master's in public administration. He mentioned working 2 jobs just to pay Harvard's tuition, and now he might not even be able to graduate. It really grounds the whole issue in the reality of individual lives and dreams.
Hearing those stories,
Mm-hmm.
it just puts the whole thing in perspective. Now, to give you listening a bit more context, this kind of tension between immigration rules and universities, it's not entirely new, right? The report compares this to some past events.
That's right. It draws some parallels. Like back in 2020 with COVID-19, ICE tried to implement a policy that would essentially kick out international students if their classes were all online. Remember that?
I do, yeah. That caused a huge uproar.
It did, and it was ultimately blocked by a lawsuit, actually led by Harvard and MIT. Then you go back to 2017, the so-called Muslim ban. That initially barred students from several countries, causing chaos before courts challenged and modified it. And even further back, the report mentions the 1950s, the McCarthy era. Academics were blacklisted, fired, based on suspected communist ties. That was later seen as a huge overreach, a violation of academic freedom.
So we've seen clashes before. What makes this Harvard situation different, according to the report? What's the key takeaway from looking back?
The really critical point the report makes is that while we've seen immigration policies affect students and universities before, this action against Harvard, it seems to be an escalation. It's apparently the first time a top-tier U.S. university has had its actual SEVP certification revoked on grounds that seem, well, politically driven.
The first time on political grounds. That feels significant.
It does. It raises new worries about politics potentially interfering directly in how universities operate, especially regarding international connections.
Yeah, it definitely feels like a concerning precedent. So looking ahead, the report doesn't just analyze the problem. It offers some ideas, some recommendations for how universities, policymakers, students might deal with this landscape. What does it suggest?
It lays out a few paths. For universities, it talks about needing contingency plans, like what do you do if this SEVP risk pops up again? Also, setting up stronger legal defense funds specifically to help international students navigate these crises.
Makes sense. Proactive steps.
And maybe even looking at more flexible ways to deliver programs more online or hybrid options so students facing visa issues might still be able to continue their studies somehow.
Okay, that's for the universities. What about the people making the policies in government?
For policymakers, the big message is the need for bipartisan guardrails, rules to prevent visa enforcement from being politicized. Decisions should be based on clear, transparent reasons, not politics.
Right, keep politics out of it.
And also actively reaffirming the value of international students and researchers, making it clear that collaboration is important for the U.S., for science, for technology.
And lastly, for the students themselves, the ones who might find themselves in this incredibly difficult situation, what advice does the report offer them?
It's very practical advice. First, get legal help immediately. Understand your rights, your options. Second, start exploring transfer possibilities early if it looks like you might need to, just to keep your status and your studies going.
Okay.
And third, document everything. Keep records of all communication with the university, with DHS. Just build a clear paper trail of your situation.
This whole situation, like the report says, it really does feel like a major turning point, a dramatic inflection point, I think was the phrase, for U.S. higher education and immigration policy. Raises some fundamental questions.
Absolutely. It throws a spotlight on this growing political scrutiny of especially elite universities. And this idea the report mentions, the rising weaponization of educational frameworks, using university rules as tools in bigger political games. That's a concerning trend.
And because the legal fight was still ongoing when this report came out, there's just this huge cloud of uncertainty left hanging. The future for thousands of students, and maybe even for America's reputation as the top global destination for academics. It's all kind of in the balance.
Precisely. Which really leads us to the final thought, something for you to maybe chew on after we wrap up. What are the long-term effects if the U.S. starts being seen as a less welcoming, less stable place for the world's brightest students and researchers.
Right.
If that global collaboration in science and innovation starts to fray, what does that ultimately mean for how knowledge gets created, how it gets shared around the world? It's a really big question to consider.